It's a team. It's organization. It's not any one of us. It's all of us working together. There has to be a certain direction. There has to be a certain amount of leadership, obviously. But it really is the synergy of all of you and all of us working together in a concerted action program that gets things accomplished. It's amazing to see the things that can be done when you have a common purpose, recognizing a problem with the same solution in mind, and knowing it's the right solution in many, many cases. The thing is that the John Birch Society, when it comes to making a difference, a lot of times our members don't even recognize the fact of how important they really are, how important you are in the general scheme of things, and how important the American people are in the general scheme as far as liberty around the world. The American people are the keystone in the arch of liberty, to coin a phrase of Lenin and twist it to the good instead of the bad. They are the keystone in the arch of liberty for the entire globe. Now, what Lenin said was that socialized medicine is the keystone in the arch of socialism. So that's how important Obamacare is to the socialists, is very important. But the American people, if they understand what is the problem and what is the solution and the importance of liberty in this country, then the rest of the world will remain free. There is a plan. Things don't happen unless people want them to happen in politics. That's nearly a quote of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But nothing happens unless it's planned that way in politics. And that's a concept that a lot of people can't seem to get across in their own heads. That these things are not an accident. If we're marching towards socialism, the people in authority and responsibility in this country must want us to march towards socialism. They know what socialism is just as much as you do. It's not an accident. And so there is a plan to rule us. That's what it's all about. And it's been the same plan for over 2,000 years. Nothing has changed except technology. Human, the human aspect of all this, human nature, does not change. It remains the same. Now, yes, we have the telephone and the telegraph and, all the rest of it. And those things have changed. But the human nature aspect of wanting to rule and knowing the nature of people and to be able to misuse that nature against the people to bring about a totalitarian state to rule them has never changed since Rome. Now, there's one thing that you may not recognize that is a technological advance, but that's the use of paper as money. I think the first ones to ever do it were the Chinese, but it was an innovation of how to get the population to use paper instead of gold and silver as a monetary unit. And that was done around 1000 AD, somewhere in there. I'm not sure of the exact date. But as far as human nature goes, of giving something to the people that they think they need, and in the process enslaving them with it, has not changed. And these things have been codified over the years. Machiavelli's Prince, for instance, codified part of it. The Communist Manifesto codified it. And so they have an agenda. They know that if they do this step and then this step and then this and this and this, pretty soon they're going to rule over the people that are their target. And they can get the people to do it to themselves, or at least acquiesce to it happening. And if you know that, number one, there are people who want to rule, and number two, they have an agenda, then you can formulate a counter agenda. You can go and get in front of them and stop some of their designs so that it throws them completely off schedule. Now, the John Birch Society has done that before, and we've written about it in the bulletin. But you see, all around the world was the communist menace. Now, for those of you who are not old enough to remember this, but some of you are, in the 50s and 60s was the growing communist menace around the world. They were taking over. They were slaughtering millions of people, their own people that they ruled in China and Russia and elsewhere. And they had a plan for taking over the United States, and they started to implement that plan. But there were key aspects of that plan that the John Birch Society got in front of and said, wait a minute, we know this is where they're going. We're going to head them off at the pass, so to speak. So they can't get over that pass and make it into a totalitarian state. And a couple of these things that were very important was the United Nations. When we started our Get Us Out of the United Nations campaign, the vast majority of the American people were for the United Nations. And we were able to change that. But the other thing that was so very important was the nationalization of the American local police departments. You cannot have a totalitarian state unless you have a national police force. It's impossible. If you've got the local sheriff, and Mr. Pratt's already talked about that, and if you have the local chiefs of police and everything else saying, wait a minute, we're independent, we answer to the local citizens who pay our taxes and everything else. We don't answer to Washington, D.C. And if you've got that system, it's impossible for them to come in and take over the local governments. And so what we did was we started a Support Your Local Police program. Man, it was a fantastic thing. Many of us up here, and I know you out there, were involved in some very, very effective organizations where we stopped riots in the streets, where we stopped communist programs from taking over the local police departments. And it was an exciting time. And what it did was it started, this and a few other programs, started to slow down the agenda of the, let's call it just for the sake of simplicity, it slowed down the communist plan for ruling the world because they had to have the United States citizen in their pocket. If they didn't, they couldn't rule the world because we were the strongest nation in the world. We could stop anybody. As a matter of fact, we used to do a lot of studies in the John Birch Society that showed if it wasn't for American tax money, they couldn't even have a war, the communists. We were sending them money, we were sending them the technology and everything to even fight us in Vietnam. For those of you who were not involved at that time, we were able to prove that a lot of the things that were on the other side being shot back at us in Vietnam came from our own factories, from our own banks, and from our own technology. It was incredible. We had a petition where we got millions of people to sign that said stop aid and trade to the communist countries, and got that into Congress and slowed it down. But there were a lot of things like that going on. Even today, most Americans don't realize that Europe couldn't survive today if it wasn't from the Federal Reserve. The money that's being bled out of this country into these foreign banks is phenomenal, and it's always been the case since the onset of the Federal Reserve, and most people don't know that. However, the point is, without America in subjection, world domination cannot work. And so they had to segue into a new program. And they segued into a program of communism is dead, and convinced the world that communism no longer exists. Now, they were able to do that because the media never asked the question, well, wait a minute, you had these hundreds of thousands, millions of members of the Communist Party all over the world. With the death of communism, what happened to those people? You had tens of thousands of communists in the Communist Party in the United States. What happened to all those people? I mean, they're doing all of these things, and then all of a sudden they just declare themselves dead. Now, that doesn't make sense. They didn't commit suicide. So what happened? Well, what happened was they just stepped back, took out the leaders around the world that were known as communists, and substituted people in the second level of the communist leadership and put them into power and called them Democrats. I think that's what they did here. But at any rate, and some Republicans do, yeah. The wag over here. But at any rate, seriously, this meant that they had to put the cork back into the bottle. You know how hard that is to do? And, you know, I don't know, I don't drink wine, but I understand that once you pop it, you just can't get that sucker back in there. And so the thing is that has been the problem around the world. You can't go and suppress all of this that you've built up around the world. You've got to change it somehow. You've got to segue it into other activity, but make it look as though it's not communist. As one example is the terrorist organization that was emanating out of Moscow with the Japanese and the Germans and all of those terrorist organizations and in the Middle East and so on and so forth. Well, how do you do that and don't have the communist label on it? Well, you call it Muslim. And that's what's happened, because when you do it that way, then you see you create racial hatred, racial and religious hatred. You no longer look at Moscow, you now look at Mecca. But it is not Mecca, it is still Moscow. How many here have noticed, for instance, since the Boston bombing, that Putin called Obama and said we've got to cooperate more in our intelligence services to stop terrorism? Well, what a lot of people don't know is that Putin established a Russian committee after 9/11, and there he formulated two wings of it, one Russian and one American. Now, this was going to help fight the war on terrorism. And the guy he put in charge of the American wing of this thing was the New World Order lover, Henry Kissinger. And the guy he put in charge of it in Russia was the former head of the KGB, whose responsibility just before he became the head of the KGB was in charge of all the Muslim terrorist training camps in the Islamic states around the Middle East under Russian control. And now they're building that up and trying to get involved in U.S. intelligence. But anyway, I could just talk for quite a long while on that. I got to get out of there because there's more important things to discuss. The thing is that communism around the world is still flourishing. For instance, in Latin America, almost every nation now in Latin America has gone communist. Now, you haven't seen any revolutions, have you? They've been voted in. The head of Brazil is a woman that used to be the head of the communist terrorist group in Brazil, blowing people up, shooting people. Well, when communism died, she took off her khakis and her camis and put on a business suit, got a new do, and called herself a Democrat. Now she's the president of Brazil. Kirchner in Argentina is much the same. They have just ruled that she can still have control over the judiciary of Argentina. Can you imagine the President of the United States being told by Congress, yes, we allow you now to control the judiciary, the Supreme Court? How would you like to give that power to Obama? Well, that's what Kirchner has now in Argentina, and you go country by country by country. Last week, the head of the Russian military visited Nicaragua to help dedicate the new training camp for Nicaraguan armed forces that's named after the Soviet Union's leading general in World War II, Zhukov. That's a clue as to what's happened to Nicaragua. And you can go state by state by state south of the border, and it's that way. It's a boiling powder keg around the world of where they can't keep the lid on it much longer, that wait a minute, something is very wrong here. Things are a boil. And how long are you going to be able to keep the lid on something like that? And so you're starting to see in the United States, because it's so critical and the American people are so critical, you're starting to see a desperation on their part. Now you see it as a run to the finish line, and that would be correct, but you don't get the sense of what's really going on. They're scared to death of the American people. They're starting to wake up. And so how are you going to put a lid on that one? And so they're pushing a lot of things right now that is even waking up the American people even more. And we can take advantage of that. Now, some of the things that we've been successful at in recent history is through our program to stop a North American Union. It was so successful that they had to take the website down, because if people wouldn't believe us, we say, go to their website, see what they say about this program, and see if it isn't what we are telling you, if it's not even worse. So they had to take that down. They had to take it down because, in essence, we put out at least 3 million contacts with new people in an outreach program all over the country on the NAU through various means, our magazine, trifold flyers, the internet, emails, so on and so forth. Then you take a look at how many people have seen Overview, for instance, Jack's DVD. You know, that thing, we stopped counting after 7 million people. You know, we had a pretty good count. And that was, what, 2 years ago? Yeah. So we have no idea how many people have seen Overview. We know people right now, and your, what is it, your niece? What is she? Your daughter?
My niece.
Okay, your niece. She goes out to the, when they swear in new citizens in her town with Overview and hands them out to the new citizens as they're coming out. Yeah. So at any rate, that's the sort of thing that starts to permeate out there. When you've got tens of thousands and millions of people seeing very important DVDs that teach principles and understanding, that starts to produce a level of influence. When you know that at least 4.5 million people read one article out of the New American last year online, that's a lot of people. I don't know how many it's going to be this year because we got hacked. And so it kind of made us dip a little bit, but we're going to have at least maybe 5.5, 6,000 that will see it this year. Million that will see at least read one article on the New American. That's real influence. And so that starts to permeate into such things as Fast and Furious. You know, we broke Fast and Furious. Most people don't know that. We've not even really told our members about this. Because what we did was we started to put online the data early on of this thing that's going on that ultimately became known as Fast and Furious. Now, because that we aimed some of this at the people who were responsible along the border, like ICE and the Border Patrol, they started to see this and they said, boy, we don't like this. And they started to find out amongst themselves that, yeah, this is true. And it started to boil within the Border Patrol and ICE, and that's finally what broke out into Fox News, and it became a national headline that people started to know about. But that came about because of the work of our internet reporting. And so those sorts of things are a result of the influence of just that one thing alone. Another thing, Agenda 21, I have to chuckle when I read things like other organizations, and I'm not going to name them, they're good friends and allies and everything else, but they said, we struggled for years on Agenda 21, we're getting nowhere. And then suddenly 2 years ago, it broke loose. Well, I wonder what happened 2 years ago. That's when the John Birch Society jumped into it and decided to do a national program and give it national coordination, the tools and the means to get those things disseminated, and things started to happen. And today, everybody's talking about Agenda 21 on both sides of the equation. It's funny, though, one side of the other side says, this is not a UN program. Don't pay any attention to that. Don't look behind the curtain. And this side says, well, the UN program, Agenda 21, is being attacked by the John Birch Society. So they haven't coordinated their truth yet. But it's gotten to the point, because of Agenda 21 and a number of these other things, the influence we have in other groups, we do have a lot of leadership in many of these organizations. In fact, that's probably what's propped up some of these things, is because we have influence in this surge of awareness out there. Where we have not been able to get into the leadership, a lot of these organizations have waned. In my lifetime, I've seen 3 major surges of Americans awakening and getting involved. And in every case, it goes like this, and then it comes right back down. And then it goes like this again and comes right back down. Well, this time, I don't think it's going to come all the way down, because there are too many of them, and we have too many members now in leadership in these organizations, giving them good information, and so on and so forth. It's quite a revelation. In fact, within the Republican Party, you can tell the Republican Party is concerned. They got a scare this last time because they lost control of a lot of these conventions around the country with these upstarts that have never been here before. New people. And you don't want new people. What you want is an umbrella. You see, that's what they always say. We've got to have a broad umbrella coalition within the Republican Party. But they always hold it in their left hand. And so the conservatives and constitutionalists are left out in the cold. And they don't like it when the umbrella, when they move in underneath and start to take an active role. They hate it. Believe me, I've been in enough of these things over the years, and I'm going to have a column in one of the bulletins soon that go into the experiences of this thing within the Republican Party. It is a serious, very serious problem. There are very good Republicans involved. They're in office and they're in activist roles and so on and so forth. But the pinnacle of the Republican Party, it's terrible. It's really bad. They are really more of an enemy than the Democrats. In fact, the rhino is not your enemy because you can see him. It's the conservative Republican that pretends to be conservative that is your enemy inside any of these parties. They will talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. And they will knife you in the back, and I'm going to have I think you'll find a very interesting column on that not this next time, but maybe the time after that. At any rate, but it is all of you working on the same thing at the same time that did this thing with the North American Union. It was you working at the same time with the same solutions, with the same tools, etc., that reinforces one another out there in the national area, that has brought the awareness of Agenda 21 to so many people. So much so now that and we were the only ones that I think did it. I don't think I'm saying anything mistakenly here, but we had in all of our literature the 3-click challenge, right? You start here, and within 3 clicks, you're in the UN. Well, we got out so much material that now they've changed their websites. So you can't do that anymore. So now we revised the lengthy version of the DVD, and we're coming out with a new trifold, new booklet, and so on and so forth, that still shows them how to get there, but you can't do it in 3 clicks exactly. But that's the kind of exposure they can't stand. You know, they're kind of like bugs. You ever turn over a rock? They scurry. They find another rock. And that's what happens when you expose things like Agenda 21. They look for another rock, all the while denying that they're involved in anything nefarious. But it is you working together with a common purpose that is able to do this. And all of you may think that you're alone in your neighborhood, or you're alone in your town, or you're alone in your state. But you would be amazed at how this ripples out across the whole country if you're using the same material, the same argument, and the same solution. And you're doing it all at the same time with enough energy, with enough financing behind it. It makes a difference. It works. It doesn't matter how many of you there are if you plan it very well in your local community. If you say to yourself, who do we need to touch? Who do we need to outreach to? How are we going to organize this to get this information out there where it's going to be the biggest bang for the buck and the minute and the hour and the day we're going to put into it? And when you do that in your chapter meetings and plan those things, you will be amazed over a period of time the results that you will have. I've seen it happen so many times. People are amazed from the outside of the John Birch Society how few of us can make such a huge difference in our local area. It is astonishing. You know, truth has an ability to do that. And when truth is put out there and understanding is put out there, things will change. Things do happen. The thing that we've got to concentrate on at the same time that we do these things is, how can I increase my numbers in the process? How can I reach out to those individuals that I want to be a member of the John Birch Society? And if I do all my activities with recruiting in mind, along with all the rest of this, then you will start to see your area grow. It happens. But you have to always keep it here to make it happen. Because, you know, there's a funny thing about educating people. If they don't have anything to work on, if they don't have a solution to get involved in, they usually put the stuff down and say, oh golly, this is really bad. I guess I need to get back to work. And that's what happens. But if you give them something that they can actually get involved in alongside of you, then you start to see your numbers grow. And then they grow, and then they grow, and then they grow. But you always have to keep that recruiting aspect on your mind. We have tremendous opportunities ahead of us. If you take a look, and if you have no solution in mind, if you have no way to involve yourself, if you don't realize that something can be done, you look around yourself and you might go into the fetal position in your bedroom. But if you understand that there are things that you can do, that you can become a leader in your local neighborhood, where you can reach out and even introduce yourself to your next door neighbor. What a novel idea. You know, in some states they can't do that. They come around the corner in their BMW and they do that click. And the door goes up, then they run on in there with their car, shut off their engine, the door closes and the sprinkler comes on in the front yard. And then they go in and talk to their friends. Their friends are ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox. Well, they don't really talk to them. I think they use four-letter words somehow when they're watching these things. They don't talk to their neighbor who's doing the same thing next door. But they don't connect with one another and realize, wait a minute, we have a common bond here. Maybe there's something that we can work together on doing. Maybe, you think? And if we get people back to their local neighborhoods and involve their neighbors, you're going to start to see things change in your neighborhood, and then in your city, and then in your county, and then in your state. And it starts at that level. How many here believe in the Second Amendment? Now, what does it say? A militia being necessary, right? If you don't even know your neighbor's name, why would he trust you? That was the thing about Paul Revere. Do you think that Paul Revere rode out and yelled at strangers? You know, he went out and John gets up and Mary's laying in bed and oh, somebody's out there yelling. So go see what it is, says Mary. And so John dutifully, under orders, gets out of bed, goes to the window and looks out, and there's this guy out there on this horse, some out of the British. Who is it? I don't know. Some nuts out there running, he's drunk or something and yelling about the redcoats. No, they knew Paul Revere. He worked with them. They established a network out there of working with people through the neighborhoods, through the little towns. They got to know one another so they could trust one another. If you don't know your neighbor, you can't trust him. You've got to get to know your neighbors. And so we've got to start there. Knock on your neighbor's door. Give them a pamphlet. Once you get to know your neighbors, you'll be surprised how much you all agree and how much influence you can be, because you will know more than they know. And they're hungry for solutions. They want the problems to go away. They want security. That's why they fall for this phony security the government gets them. But if you can show them that real security is working together and educating more people and getting more people involved, then they will become fast friends. How many here who've been members for a long time still have Birchers that you joined with originally that are still your great friends? Don't you? You know, it becomes a bond that's just incredible. And I've got a lot of people like that all over the country that I worked with when I was a very young man, that we're very close. And it, like I said, it's a bond that develops. And it becomes enjoyable to be with these people working together. But let me leave you with this message, and that is this: that if you work together, and I've already said this, but if you work together using the right materials that have stood the test of time, and you work with other people in a concerted action program, you will be successful over a period of time, and it will depend on how well you organize it, what that period of time is. But you will be successful. Things are happening around the United States. Well, let me give you one last story that illustrates this, if I may. And that is, how many remember the, I don't know what it was called, Jack, the alternative convention in Minneapolis? A rally for the Republic. Okay, it basically was a counter meeting to the Republican convention. They had about 12,000 people there. And they refused, the guy that was the moderator refused to introduce John McManus. So somebody went to the mic and said, "John F. McManus." It's your turn. Yeah, and so he went out, but everybody knew who he was. Started to clap, 12,000 people. Now, we didn't know whether or not we could get a video of this event. And we wanted to get John on video. So we sent a man there with one of these handheld cameras, but it had a boom that stuck out in front with a little mic on the end of it, right? Well, here he is. He's videoing John, and he starts to say the motto of the John Birch Society. And he doesn't get halfway through the first sentence when you could hear that the crowd around in the audience started to pick up the chant of less government, more responsibility, and God's help, a better world. How did they know that? They knew that because of the tremendous amount of educational work that you have done over the years. There are a lot of people that may have not ever joined the John Birch Society, but they understand the worth of us. They come to us for information. They understand our slogans. This is a republic, not a democracy. Let's keep it that way, that kind of thing. It permeates all over. And you see that result in that one instance. You wouldn't realize that by walking into the place. But here you got 12,000 people, and a sizable number of them knew everything there was about the John Birch Society. That's really influence. You may not see it in your neighborhood, but it's out there. Take heart. You know, we can win this thing if we just have the resolve to do it. The group of people that are going to have the most will win. We have to have a will that will defeat the other side. We're going to have to suck it up, as they say, and get to work and get the job done. And it can be done. Don't ever think it can't. You don't know the problems the other side has because you're not in the other side. But they have serious problems. And let me leave you with this one idea. What is the biggest problem that we have with dealing with the conspiracy? We're dealing with criminals. See, we have to operate morally and ethically, don't we? They don't have to. Now, what's the biggest problem they have? They have to work with criminals. You know how hard that is? they don't trust one another. It's like the mafia. You find them laying dead in the streets once in a while because somebody wants to be the leader. And that goes on all the time, but you don't notice it. And so it has saved this country 2 or 3 times, incidentally, that kind of thing, where they simply are so jealous of one another and they are so ambitious to be the leader, they will cut each other's throat in order to climb over them to the top. And so that's to our advantage. At any rate, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for everything you do. God bless you, and God bless America.